Yeah. Then I can sync the audio since I've got two audio sources happening. Yeah, so our sort of standard question is your name, where your current living and work locations are. Yeah, so tell me your name.
My name is Judith Plaskow.
And tell me where you're currently working and living.
I'm retired from Manhattan College, which is in the Bronx, and I'm living in Manhattan.
All right. Can I just have you tell me what you had for breakfast today?
I had a fried egg on toast and a banana.
Sounds very good.
On gluten-free toast.
How was the gluten-free toast?
It's edible. That's that's sort of the best thing you can say for
Okay. All right. Sound and everything's looking good.
it. Okay.
And hopefully I shouldn't have to be wearing the headphones the whole time or anything.
So maybe I should. Oh, I got up, so that's good.
Oh, no, you're fine. The chair should be in its perfect location.
I think I will. Let's see.
Okay, we're ready.
Okay.
We're finally ready. All the sandwiches are made. Sounds pretty good. So, all right. Thanks for having me. And so the way that we've been doing the questions has been a little like sort of starting out from earlier experiences, then moving into academic experiences, and that's sort of the future legacy so that's sort of where we're starting. And we've been asking everyone just to basically, we did sort of the what's your current, you talked about being retired. Do you have a current research project? We'll start with that easy one before we go. Or what are some of your interests? What are you doing with retirement?
I'm doing a lot of different things with retirement. I'm spending an afternoon a week with my granddaughter.
Oh, wow.
I'm very involved in Jews for Racial and Economic Justice. I'm taking a class at my synagogue. And I do have a writing project, which is quite different from anything I've done so far. It's on embodiment, toilets, and social justice.
Toilets, all right.
Yeah.
I wasn't expecting to hear that.
Yes, I know, right.
What's why toilets?
Because toilets have played an immensely important role in basically all the social justice struggles of the 20th century, from the civil rights movement to worker rights to disability rights to transgender rights to feminism. And I think that elimination is an aspect of embodiment that really hasn't been looked at by feminists. We talk about the body, but we don't talk about the eliminating body. Now, if you read Z's old self-blessing ritual,
Yeah.
she has a blessing for her vagina and her womb, but not her anus. What is that about?
Oh, very cool.
Right.
Well, I'll be looking forward to that project coming out. All right, great. How is it feeling comfortable in the setup?
Yep.
Great.
The new book, do you want to talk about that? Or will that come up later?
If you want to talk about the new book, yeah, you can talk about that also.
Yeah, so Carol Christ and I have a new book called Goddess and God in the World, Conversations in Embodied Theology, where we talk about the development of our theologies from childhood to the present, and then we question each other about our theological positions, challenge each other, respond to those challenges, and so on. So it's a theological autobiography. It's a conversation. I think it's a powerful model of talking across differences that's very useful at this current moment.
That actually sounds really useful, and we'll hopefully sort of dovetail into our interview, because that's some of the things that I'm hoping to talk about. So yeah, sort of moving back into early experiences, we've been asking folks, if you could go back in time, do you have an early experience of gender or even sexuality, or just noting that maybe if you identify as female or as a woman, some early experience of either noting that you were different or maybe didn't have the same access, or maybe you did? Just if there's a story.
I don't know at what point I began to notice gender. I grew up in a Reformed congregation that paid lip service to equality. Men and women sat together, but in fact, women were up on the bema, the platform at the front of the synagogue, only to light candles on Friday night. My rabbi was opposed to the ordination of women because it was against tradition, quote unquote, even though men didn't cover their heads in the synagogue. The man had covered his head. He would be asked to take his kippah off. So the synagogue violated tradition in 100 ways. But I think I felt that there was something wrong, but it took me a long time to articulate it. I guess the moment I would mention as a kid, one night when I was about, 10 or 11, it occurred to me as I was falling asleep one night that God might be a woman. And I remember lying there in total jubilation, thinking, we don't know who God is. There's no reason that God couldn't be a woman. And then I forgot about that experience for years until really I was a graduate student and began thinking about female God language. Now, I had an aunt who saw it as one of her goals in life to make me into a proper girly girl. And I was resisting her my entire life from as early as I can remember. So that was my other awareness of gender. Like when I had my tonsils out when I was 6, I asked her for a book and she gave me a pink nightgown, which I had absolutely no interest in. So, that was the other big piece.
I can relate to that. So did you feel, you resisted being the girly girl, but did you, I've always felt sort of more tomboy, but did you?
No, I was not a tomboy, but I always got the message that I was too smart for a girl, that I thought like a man or a boy. I mean, that was the seat of the conflict for me. The message always that I was too smart. Girls weren't supposed to be smart. Or they weren't supposed to show that they were smart. It was, if you could be smart, but you should pretend you're dumb.
So was your, when you were hearing that message, was it, did you resist it, or did you feel more like, oh, I should try to?
I resisted it. I really, I won't say I didn't pay attention to it because it was very deeply wounding, but I certainly never tried to live out that. It seemed completely preposterous to me. And on some level, I didn't even know what it meant. What would it mean to pretend you were dumb? And why would you do that?
These are great. How about this? Oh, cool. Let me just make a quick check, okay? Gonna do a slightly different angle. Yeah, you're seeming very relaxed, and hopefully you're feeling relaxed. So, so then you spoke about this a little bit in terms of having that image of God, that maybe God is a woman. And you talked a little bit about being in this Reformed synagogue. But is there any other experiences that you had growing up in terms of God or the divine or religious practices that led you to sort of, did you feel this draw to being a religious scholar?
Yeah.
Or, like, how did that come about?
I really think that I was born a theologian. I mean, I've been interested in religious questions from as early as I can remember, and it didn't come from my family. I mean, you know, we went to temple on the holidays, but my family wasn't any more religious than any of the other Reformed Jews around them. When I was 12, my best friend and I began reading about the Holocaust, and we read everything we could get our hands on. So that was very important intellectually for me and emotionally to start thinking about whether God was involved in evil, but even more than that, what did it mean that human beings were capable of such evil? And was it simply historical accident that Jews were the victims? Could Jews have been Nazis if they had been in a position of power? So, you know, those were questions that I was thinking about as a 12-year-old. And then as a teenager, I thought about becoming a rabbi, but there were no women who were rabbis at that point, and I wasn't 100% sure I believed in God, and I thought, well, for a woman to become a rabbi, I'd have to be 100% sure, even if a guy didn't have to be 100% sure. I don't know how I knew that either, but I did. Then when I was a sophomore in college, it suddenly occurred to me I could get a PhD in religion. So that was kind of my alternative, in a sense, to being a rabbi. I don't know why I thought I could do that. That seemed relatively straightforward to me. Oh yeah, you know, I could do that. So.
Yeah. And I wonder which was the more acceptable or harder path.
Right. I mean, in fact, they were probably about the same, because I would have been the second woman to be ordained in the Reform movement, not the first. Had I applied to rabbinical school out of college, you know, I didn't know that was a possibility. At the time that Carol and I started our degrees in theology, the field was under 10% women. You know, we certainly encountered many, many obstacles. So it probably, you know, was about 6 to 1 and half a dozen of another. I mean, I'm very glad I became an academic. Had I become a rabbi, I would have ended up being an academic anyway. You know, but
yeah,
yeah,
that makes sense. Right. So you talked about, you touched on family religious practices, but I don't think I asked you where you grew up. Where did you grow up?
I grew up on Long Island, West Hempstead, Long Island. It was white, middle-class suburb, boring, on Long Island.
So I have to periodically turn the camera on and off between questions. It records for about 14 minutes or so, and then it wants to reboot. So I'll just do that, and we'll keep going. You talked about, before we move into sort of the academic career, I want to stay back in this sort of some formative experiences. You talked about that formative experience of suddenly thinking God could be a woman. Were there any other, and also sort of being 12 and studying about the Holocaust, were there any other experiences that you maybe had of the divine, however you might think about that, early on, or just thinking about God or thinking about the divine that felt formative, or encounters that you haven't talked about?
I don't think so. I don't remember. On the one hand, I was a spiritual kid. I mean, when I was 7, I was at Yom Kippur service, to children's service on Yom Kippur morning. And even though I didn't need to go back in the afternoon, I promised God that I would go back. So I I had a relationship with God, but I don't remember distinct revelatory moments, in my childhood, other than that sense that God might be a woman. But it wasn't as if God visited me. These were intellectual questions and thoughts. Yeah.
Yeah. Seems to be the strand, which makes sense where you headed. So you've already touched on some of the questions I had for academic and careers, sort of how did this path unfold? And I feel like you already got into that a little bit in terms of wrestling with to be a rabbi or the academic path. Once you sort of had that realization when you were a sophomore in undergrad, then what? Did you...
Well, I had been an English major, and I switched my major to philosophy in order to prepare for graduate school in religion. There was no religion major in my college. And I spent my junior year at the University of Edinburgh, and while I was there, I did 2 intensive biblical studies courses. I did the first and second year courses simultaneously, so that that was great, actually. I got really rich, intense exposure to Bible, the documentary hypothesis, all that. And then I came back my senior year and I did a directed readings course with one of the professors who I think actually was an MDiv in addition to being a PhD. I did a theology reading course, so I began to prepare in that way. And then I applied to graduate school in theology. Now, the issue was that there was nowhere in the country to go at that point to study Jewish theology. And there's still almost nowhere, but there was literally nowhere at that point. So I had to go to a school with a Christian history. I applied to Yale. I did not apply to Harvard because the degree in theology was in the divinity school and I didn't want to do that. At Yale, it was in the graduate school. Of course, I had no idea that the graduate curriculum in theology was completely shaped by the divinity school curriculum. So while there was a formal distinction, there was actually very little distinction. So I ended up getting a degree in Protestant theology.
And that was for the master's, or that was the PhD? No,
that was a doctorate.
Okay.
Yeah, there was no master's. I went at Yale, applied right for the PhD.
So were you able to get support for the work that you wanted to do doing this?
Well, I didn't really know what the work was that I wanted to do. I mean, Carol and I were among maybe 3, there was at least one other student, maybe 2, who had come to the graduate program straight from college. Everybody else had an MDiv. So especially not having a religion major in college, I felt like I was kind of thrashing around while I was at Yale, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do, so I can't say. I couldn't seek support for it. I don't know. Wouldn't have gotten it anyway. But I was unclear. At first, I thought I was going to write my dissertation on the problem of evil, and then I decided I just didn't want to immerse myself in that issue for many years. So I ended up writing a feminist dissertation, which was actually, I think, the second feminist dissertation in religious studies after Rita Gross's.
Wow.
Yeah. And Julian Hart was the advisor for both Carol and me. He already knew he was leaving for the University of Virginia when he agreed to become our advisor, but nobody else in the department would have taken on the dissertation. So I wrote it with not only no support, but with the director of graduate studies and other members of the department trying to torpedo it. Carol was really my advisor.
And this Carol?
Carol Christ.
Okay.
Yeah, was really.
Yeah,
I mean, yeah.
You keep
yeah,
referring to
I'm
Carol.
sorry.
I was
Right,
assuming it was Carol Christ.
Right,
You
right.
should say a
Yeah.
word about Carol Christ when you came in, Carol Christ.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because you've mentioned Carol a few
Right.
times.
Yeah. So when I came into Yale, Carol Christ was a year ahead of me, and we became good friends my second year and her third year at Yale, and we were each other's support system and were essentially each other's advisors.
Yeah, so you made your own community. it
Yes,
sounds
we
like.
did. We made our own minority, what do you call it? We were a group of two, yeah.
Wow. And you said that the director was actually not only not supportive, but trying to torpedo the project.
Yeah, the director of graduate studies.
Yeah. What did that mean?
It meant that he told me my dissertation was on was looking at Reinhold Niebuhr and Paul Tillich's doctrines of sin and grace through the lens of women's experience, and he told me that it would be a good dissertation if I left out women's experience. And when he sent it around to the whole department, I guess every proposal was sent around. He sent it around, sort of asking people for negative feedback.
Wow. Literally asking for negative.
Yeah, I forget
Yeah,
exactly,
yeah,
but it was, it was eliciting negative feedback. But there were 3 people who were willing to be on my committee, and so, he didn't really have the power to stop it.
So how did you keep going when you were realizing that there was sort of this backdrop of not being supportive?
Well, at the end of my 3rd year at Yale, when I had finished my exams, my comprehensives, I actually decided that I was going to drop out. That I would, I had gotten my MPhil at that point, but I wasn't planning to return. And my then husband was teaching at Sir George Williams University in Montreal, now Concordia. So we moved to Montreal. And getting out of New Haven and beginning to teach as an adjunct at Sir George just helped me get really clear that I could write the dissertation I wanted to write. And obviously I needed people to support it or I couldn't do it. But, if the bulk of the department didn't like it, tough. There was something about physically removing myself from that poisonous space that just enabled me to be really clear. This is what I want to do, and I'm going to do it.
All right. And you did it.
And I did it, right.
So did you write most of the dissertation from St. George's?
Sir George?
Or Sir George's?
I was in Montreal for most of the time, or for part of the time. Then I actually got a research associateship at Harvard during the first year of that program, so that was 1973, 74. So I wrote for a year at Harvard, and then we moved to New York, and so I finished it in Manhattan. So it was a peripatetic dissertation.
Wow. Wow. All right, I'm gonna make. Okay, so now one of the questions. So this can be moving into your actual academic career, but once you finish the dissertation, what was it like then moving into the job market as someone who had just written one of the first feminist dissertations in religion?
Well, I was in a very difficult position when I finished my dissertation because I'd been trained in Protestant theology. In some sense, it was really most appropriate for me to teach at a seminary, but I was a Jew, so no seminary was going to hire me. So I hadn't really thought before I wrote my dissertation about the realities of the job market. Also, the first Carol, Krista, and I wrote a little article together while we were still graduate students on the acknowledgement to the wife in the in scholarly books. It was called "For the Advancement of My Career: A Form Critical Study in the Art of Acknowledgement," and it appeared in the bulletin of the Council of the Study of Religion, and it elicited huge backlash. And one job I applied for, I was told that I wasn't going to be interviewed because of that article, that they couldn't imagine what kind of person would have written an article like that.
Wow, so way to make an entrance.
Right. So I had a number of interviews for jobs I didn't get. I mean, my favorite, I can't remember how early this was. I was interviewed for a job at Holy Cross, and the interview was going really very well, much better than I had expected. And then at one point, this was during the Vietnam War, one of the priests on the committee said to me, "What is your view on the most important moral issue of our time, abortion?" And I thought, there isn't anything I can say here that is going to save this job. So I said, I don't believe that's the most important moral issue of our time. That was the end of that interview. So I think actually my first two jobs, my ex-husband was a Judaica scholar, and we got our first two jobs together at NYU. I was at NYU for a year, and then the dean dismantled the department, and then we went to Wichita State University. So we were sort of dual hires in both cases, so I'm not sure what role that played. Then Manhattan College, when I went to Manhattan College, that we were living in Wichita. We desperately wanted to get out of Wichita. There was a job at Manhattan College. Again, I didn't know whether Catholic College would be interested, but at that point, the chair, it was a wonderful, wonderful man, had decided that he was going to hire a woman. The college had gone co-ed 6 years earlier, and there were no women in the religion department, even though every student had to take 9 credits of religion. And he took the applications of men and threw them in the garbage. And Woman Spirit Rising had just come out, and he knew it, and so he was totally thrilled when I applied. So.
So you mentioned Woman Spirit Rising. Was there? It seems like there was starting to become this cohort of women religious scholars doing this work. And at least that's how I read it. Like, wow, you talked about Carol being your community of 2, but then it sounds like the community maybe started to expand.
Yes. So in 1971, which is one of the very few AR meetings I haven't been at since 1970, Carol and Elizabeth Schussler Fiorenza started the Women's Caucus. And then the next year, 72, was the first meeting of the working group on women and religion. So that was really the beginning of the new scholarship on feminism and religion beyond, a very small cohort. So I think there were 2 sessions maybe at the 72 meeting. It was just incredibly exciting. And then around the same time, Carol, who was at Columbia at that point, started the New York area Feminist Scholars in Religion with a couple of other people, and that met monthly for about 20 years. And that was really a lot of people: Naomi Goldenberg, Karen Brown, Carol, Elizabeth Schussler Fiorenza when she was teaching at Union for a year. A lot of people who went on to make major contributions to feminist studies and religion were members of that group. Beverly Harrison. We met at Bev's apartment. Ann Barstow, was really important, especially in the early years, but it continued to be important for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, as someone coming into the field much later and then reading that work and sort of reading the histories, it feels like it was definitely a much needed support system in many ways.
Yeah, and what we did was share our work in progress. So it started in the early 70s. I shared my AR presidential address with that group, and they actually made some very important suggestions about it. So that says, it was going for 25 years, and it ended, shortly after. That was kind of the end of it.
What year was that, or when was that?
97.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you got hired at Manhattan College and are starting continuing the career. Were there times when you were were there times where you were really doubting this path, or really difficult times once you were sort of established as a scholar? Or was it, was that sort of, had you moved through that at that point, now that you had been established and the support system was sort of growing up?
Yeah, I never doubted the path. I mean, I doubted, whether my job was my best, that my particular job was my best way of expressing that path or living it or fulfilling it. But I never had any doubt about the work. And so another really important moment for me was 1980 was the meeting of the first meeting of the National Haverock Committee. It was the National Haverock Committee is essentially a summer camp for grown-ups who were involved in small grassroots Jewish communities around the country. And at that first meeting, I taught a course on Jewish feminist theology. And although I'd been teaching women in religion for a few years at that point, I had never had an opportunity to teach on Jewish feminism. And I wasn't sure that anybody would be interested, but in fact, some people signed up for the Institute in order to take it. And that was an incredible class. I mean, that class was a life-changing experience for me because it was the place where my Jewish identity came together with my feminist work, and where I just became clear that I was going to shift my focus to Jewish feminist theology. And out of that summer institute, there had been three feminist courses that had been offered, and a number of us took two of them and had been talking together through the whole week. And we decided that we needed our own space to reflect more deeply on the feminist transformation of Judaism. So we started a Jewish feminist spirituality collective, Benot Aish, in 1981, the next year, and that's still meeting. So that became a really important locus for my work. So sort of the feminist scholars in religion, the AR Women in Religion section, and Benot Aish became the think tanks and sources for my work.
Yeah, it sounds like, I mean, part of the conversation of these interviews is thinking about finding your voice, like your voice in scholarship, your voice in this work. And what I'm hearing is that there were that was sort of simultaneous with these communities growing up, and being able to hone and get more clear about what your voice was. Is there other things, or if you hear that title, Forging Voice, like what does that resonate, or when thinking back on your career, like how you came into that?
Yeah, I think that, I said earlier that I was just really clear that I was going to write this dissertation, whether Yale liked it or not. But was that, well, the chapter on women's experience was totally my voice. But then I was in this weird position, as I said, of writing Protestant theology. I mean, the last chapter is a little bit constructive, but how could I do constructive theology in someone else's tradition? So I didn't really know how I was going to find my voice, and that's why the first Summer Institute was a hugely important moment in becoming clear, this is my voice. But I think I was still really stuck in anger at the Jewish tradition. For a lot of years, I was stuck in anger. As Susanna Heschel wrote in the introduction to her anthology on Jewish feminism, Jewish feminists were knocking at the door, asking to be let in, and waiting for people with more knowledge, more power, to let us in and to change the tradition. And it's a huge difficulty within Judaism because it's a tradition that values knowledge so much. If you didn't go to yeshiva and you didn't learn Jewish texts from the time that you were 5 years old, you can never catch up with people who've been doing that their whole lives. And then are you allowed to speak? Do you have the authority to speak? And at some point in the early to mid 80s, I suddenly realized we could take the power. It was our tradition. It was ours to transform. And that was another hugely important shift. I stopped, not that I'm not angry, I'm still angry at a lot of things, but anger was no longer my predominant feeling. It was more this sense of empowerment, and excitement. This is really exciting. We can change this tradition.
Yeah, that's the first I've heard you mention anger, but I was just reading Bev Harrison's Anger in the Work of Love.
I love that. I love that essay.
Yeah, and I've been trying to get in connection to my own anger and using that for an empowerment. Elizabeth Johnson talked about when we interviewed her about she was so angry through this 10-year process that she channeled that anger into writing She Who Is. And so was that anger sort of something you had a consciousness of as you're making these different strides or writing your dissertation or did it really just come on in that mid 80s where you're like, I'm angry?
No, I knew that I was angry on it. I was spending a lot of my time angry. I don't know that I perceived the anger in the powerful terms that Bev describes it. I was angry because we were being mistreated. I was angry because the tradition was a deeply patriarchal tradition. I didn't experience the anger as empowering. I'm not sure I would have named it, you have to be angry in order to fight against injustice. It was in moving to saying, wait, we can do this, that I began to experience the importance of the anger in a different kind of way. Yeah, I firmly believe in anger. I find it very disturbing when people say, but you're so angry. Of course I'm angry. How could you not be angry?
Yeah, I hear that. I think we're, yep, it's 10 till.
Crucial moment for me was the conference at which I met Elizabeth.
We're rolling, so you can talk about it.
Oh, okay. So in 1972, there was a conference of Women Doing Theology, that wasn't exactly the name, something like that, Women Doing Theology, Grailville. And Carol had been invited. It was a totally Christian conference, but she couldn't come because she was packing up to move to Columbia, and she asked them if I could go in her stead, and they said okay. So that was the conference where I met Elizabeth Schisler-Fiorensis. Elizabeth had just moved to the U.S. from Germany very shortly before. And Nell Morton was there, Rosemary Ruther was there. It was mainly women in ministry, but you know, there was definitely a subgroup of academics.
All right, yeah, watch your step here because there's lots to trip over.
Okay.
You should say it was mainly in ministry in front, that's what we're looking. That's
Are
where the-
you
that's
coming
where
back
the-
or I can
that's
put
where the
this?
documents
Okay.
were happening.
Nice to meet you and thanks for your patience with all of this equipment and silence and, uh-oh, here. Yeah. Sorry, no, I blocked everything in here.
So most of the women there were in ministry. Most of the women there were in ministry, but you know, there was a subgroup of academics, but it was an incredible week of exploring new images for God, new ways of thinking. It was at that conference that I wrote my Coming of Lilith midrash out of my small group, and Rosemary asked if she could publish it as the epilogue to Religion and Sexism, and Elizabeth and I became friends at that conference, and our relationship was also very important to my career, and we started the Journal of Feminist Studies and Religion together. As I mentioned before, she was in the Feminist Scholars in Religion for a year. So yeah, that was another really important moment of finding community with other women.
Can you say just what that's, will you just so I can have it on film, what that conference was?
It was called Women, I think it was Women Doing Theology at Grailville. It brought together women from all over the country who were starting to think about the connections between feminism and religion.
And what year was that?
1972. It was the summer of 1972. So the Women's Caucus was then founded in the fall of 72. So everything was beginning to emerge. No, the Women's Caucus was founded in the fall of 71. The working group on women and religion met for the first time in the fall of 72. So everything was starting to emerge at that time in the early 70s.
So I want to just talk a little bit about about your research process, and then we're going to move into the future legacy. But as you've been producing this work, what's your favorite part? What has been your favorite part of doing this work, whether it's your research or your teaching, or maybe there's more than one favorite part?
I really see my writing as my legacy. Teaching at Manhattan College, all the courses I've taught have essentially been service learning courses because students are required to take 9 credits of religion. So where I've really had an impact is in my writing, more than my teaching. For a long time, writing was difficult for me. Writing my dissertation was kind of like drawing blood. But as I've gotten older, writing comes more easily, and I've come to enjoy it more and more. For several years, I was writing a quarterly column for Tikkun magazine, and that was the most fun writing I've ever done. I just totally enjoyed that. I was writing about specific issues in Jewish feminism. Started out writing about Jewish feminist theology, then I wrote a lot of stuff on gay and lesbian issues at some point. And I just had a great time with that. And now writing gives me pleasure.
How did you, what were you finding difficult when you were starting out? Was it just the task of it, or was it trying to figure out?
I think it was some piece of perfectionism and, wanting the words to be exactly right and wanting to be 100% sure when I was writing my thesis that I didn't get anything wrong. And I still find the most difficult and least pleasurable kind of writing giving an account of somebody else's thinking, because I'm very aware of the question, am I getting this exactly right? Am I being fair? Are they going to be mad at me? So, and my dissertation was a lot that. A lot of giving account of other people's work. So that was difficult, but I was struggling. I was struggling to find my voice, but it's not like a dissertation is exactly written in your voice. It has to fulfill certain criteria, and there are expectations surrounding it. And I have always found doing academic writing more boring than doing constructive theological work. I think actually that's, the last couple of academic things that I was asked to write kind of bored me to death writing, and they were much harder to write. Part of the fun of writing the book that Carol and I just had published in August was combining the elements of autobiography with theology, that I could allow the theology to emerge and be articulated out of my autobiography, and I wasn't, talking about somebody else's thought. And the chapters of the book where we do talk about the history of theology and the history of feminist theology, I found the least enjoyable to write.
That makes sense to me. Yeah, I feel similarly. So if you could this is going to be in a shorter way, but like if you could describe what is the basis of your theology, or what is your theological norm, or at the foundation of all the work that you do? Does that question make sense?
My work has really been about, in my dissertation, I developed an understanding of women's experience in my first chapter and used it to criticize Niebuhr and Tillich. And that concept of, even though I know the critiques of it, and I know there's a certain naivete to it, that concept of women's experience has remained foundational to me. And really the core question at the heart of my Jewish feminist work is, what would this tradition look like if women had an equal hand in creating it? And it's not that I'm arguing that there's a single answer to that question, not remotely, but to rethink central concepts and practices of Judaism from the perspective of feminism and women's experience.
Can I say something? I think you should talk about the community interpreting that thing, that you don't have a norm in the tradition in that sense.
Yeah, yeah, I don't have, there's not a part of the tradition, neither the tradition as a whole nor some part of the tradition that I see as essential is my norm. My norm comes out of the community of people trying to transform Jewish tradition and make it inclusive of all the voices in the Jewish community, so that we're always in conversation with the tradition, but the norms come out of the parts of the tradition that we choose. And the norms come out of the community.
That was perfect.
Yeah. So unlike some other feminists, I do not believe that the Jewish tradition is essentially non-sexist. I think that there are parts of it that can be read that way, and there are huge parts of it that are profoundly sexist and patriarchal, and that's why it needs to be changed.
Yeah, I hear that. So I want to thinking about the future, and thinking about sort of as I'm finishing up my PhD and heading into this field, I'm wanting to hear like what are you thinking? What are some of the immediate issues that feminist theologians of all stripes, like, do you feel like there's something that needs to be addressed that hasn't been addressed, or that there's just one area that I wish people would address, or just in more general?
I'm worried about the future of the field. I'm worried that young people are advised not to do feminist work or other transgressive work until they have tenure, and I hate that. Why would you go into a field and then not do the work that you went into it to do? And by the time you have tenure, if you've never written any feminist work, why would you even remember what it was that you wanted to say? So that concerns me. And with the with the corporatization of the university and the decrease in the number of tenure track positions and the hiring of adjuncts to teach a lot of courses, I'm concerned that the areas given priority are going to be traditional areas, that it's not going to be feminist and queer scholars or scholars doing post-colonial work who are the ones who are going to be hired. And when people are trying to earn a living teaching at 3 different institutions, they don't have the time to do their own scholarship. So, it's those issues of the shape of the field and what's coming down the pike that concern me very deeply. And, obviously, at this moment, a month after the election, we are facing a time of enormous backlash, and the voices of feminists become all the more important. But are we going to have the resources to sustain that work?
I hear you. If you could speak to, what would you say to a class of students either studying your work or studying feminist theology or studying feminism and religion? Like, what would you say to the class if I was going to show this clip to the class? Some of them might be becoming religious leaders, some of them might be going into scholarship.
I guess do the work of your heart. Do the work that you're driven to do, and it's not like you won't pay for it. You will. But why be here if you're not going to do the work that you care most deeply about?
Yeah.
Blessed be.
Yeah. So we could end there, or I have two other, well, I have just like one other question. One is, do you have a proudest moment from your career? If you want to answer that, if you're done, then we can.
Do I have a proud? I'd say I feel immensely proud every time someone comes over to me. It's happened a couple of times at the AR this year, but it happens, every time I'm at the AR, and says, standing again at Sinai changed my life. Actually, somebody came over to me this year crying, saying when I was 18, I read Standing Again at Sinai, and it changed my life in this way. And it's just, I feel immensely privileged to have been able to touch so many people's lives in that way.
Thank you for your work. Yeah. Thanks. The only other question is just, is there anything you want to say that I haven't asked, or anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I guess I do think it's important to say that my work has had far more impact in the Jewish community than I could have imagined. I mean, I feel incredibly grateful again to have my book is read it's part of the curriculum in the 3 non-Orthodox seminaries. It has elicited so much other work. I mean, the Reform movement some years ago put out an amazing feminist Bible commentary and Torah commentary, and it was the person who started the project read Standing Again at Sinai and said, we need a feminist Torah commentary. So it's just had so many spin-offs that, I could not have created myself, and I might not have imagined them, but it's just gone off in an amazing number of directions. And again, I just feel so grateful to have been able to be part of that process.
Yeah. Wow, okay.
Okay?
We're done. That was amazing.
Yeah.
That was really...
Even better at the
Oh,
end.
that was beautiful.
The end was,
That was...
I was crying.
I was too.
Our chills.